The night he threw my ring into the black water, he told me I would never be a Vance, and I believed him, right up until his own father reached for my hand. I did not scream when Ethan did it. That is the part people still do not understand. I stood on the stone terrace above the Hudson River with 200 guests behind me, and I watched the man I was supposed to marry pull the ring off my finger like he was pulling a splinter, and I did not make a sound. The band had just stopped playing. The string lights hung over the water in long gold ropes, and my hand was still warm where the ring had been. Ethan Vance held it up in front of everyone, turned it once in the light so the diamond caught fire, and then he opened his fingers over the railing and let it fall. I heard the small sound it made when the river took it. A soft nothing, like a coin dropped into a wishing well by someone who did not care what they wished for. My throat closed. My eyes went down to my own hand, to the pale band of skin on my finger where 3 months of belonging had lived, and that white mark was the only proof left that any of this had ever been real. Naomi, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like an apology he did not mean. Let us not make this ugly. I remember thinking that he had already made it ugly, that he had made it as ugly as a thing can get, and that he had done it with a smile so the guests would think it was my fault. Behind him, near the tall glass doors, Camille Ashford stood in a dress the color of champagne, and she was not surprised. That was the thing that cut deepest in that first second. She was not surprised at all. She lifted her own glass a half-inch, the way a person toasts a plan that has gone exactly right, and she watched me over the rim of it. I looked for Lily. That is where my eyes always go first, even now. Lily is 6 years old, Ethan's daughter, and I have brushed her hair every morning for 2 years because her father could not remember which drawer the ribbons were in. She was at the far end of the terrace in her small navy coat, holding the hand of a nanny who was already turning her away from the railing so she would not see. But she saw me. She always sees me. Her mouth opened to call my name, and the nanny pulled her through the doors before the sound could reach me, and something in my chest folded in half. A woman near me laughed. Not loud. Just enough. Just enough for me to feel the whole crowd deciding, all at once, which side of this they were going to stand on, and it was not mine. I was the caterer's daughter who had climbed too high. I was the black girl who had gotten a Vance to put a ring on her finger, and now the natural order of things had corrected itself in front of a live band, and everyone could go back to their drinks. I made my hand into a fist so no one would see it shaking. I lifted my chin. I told myself I would walk out of that house on my own feet before I let a single person on that terrace see me break, and I turned toward the doors. And that was when I felt it. The way you feel a change in the weather before it arrives. Somewhere above me, on the second-floor balcony that looked down over the whole terrace, a man was standing very still in the dark, and he was watching. Not the crowd. Not his son. Me. I could not see his face from where I stood, only the shape of him against the lit window behind, tall, unmoving, one hand resting flat on the iron rail, and even from that distance I understood something my body understood before my mind did, which was that this man had seen everything, from the first note of music to the last small splash, and that he had not moved once, and that his stillness was louder than every laugh on that terrace put together. The guests had not noticed him. Ethan had not noticed him. But the 2 guards at the doors had gone quiet the second he appeared, the way water goes quiet before it is about to move, and Camille's smile had cooled by 1 degree. I did not know his name yet. I only knew that when the most powerful thing in a room goes still, everyone in that room is already inside a story they have not been told. I pulled my coat closed and I walked toward the doors with my ruined hand hidden in my sleeve, and above me, in the dark, the man on the balcony finally lifted his hand off the rail. The house swallowed me whole. Inside, the hallway was all marble and low golden light, and my heels sounded too loud against the floor, one sharp click after another, announcing me to every person who turned to look. And they all turned to look. Word travels faster than a person can walk in a house like that. By the time I reached the second set of doors, the story of what had happened on the terrace had already run ahead of me down the corridor, and I could see it arriving on their faces before I even passed them, the little tightening of the mouth. The eyes that dropped to my bare hand and then lifted away as if they had touched something they should not have. A server I had joked with an hour earlier now looked at the floor. 2 women by the tall windows leaned their heads together and did not bother to lower their voices, and I heard the word predictable, and I heard the small laugh that came after it. I kept my chin level. I kept my ruined hand tucked into my sleeve where the white band of skin was still cooling. I had learned a long time ago that when a room decides you are small, the worst thing you can do is shrink to fit the space they have made for you, so I made myself take the long way, past the grand staircase, past the portraits of dead Vances in their heavy frames, and I walked like I had somewhere to be, because if I stopped moving I was afraid of what my knees would do. Camille found me by the coat room. Of course she did. She stepped into my path in that champagne dress with a glass of something dark in her hand, and up close her perfume was the kind that costs more than my rent, and she smiled at me the way you smile at a waiter who has brought the wrong dish. You held that together well, she said. I would not have. She let her eyes move down to my sleeve, to the place where she knew my hand was hiding. Some women make a scene. It is so much more dignified, what you did. Just leaving. She tilted her head. You are leaving, are you not? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about all the things I could have said, the ones that would have felt so good for exactly 1 second, and then handed her the scene she was fishing for. Instead I said, take care of Lily's bedtime. She needs the small lamp on, or she wakes up. And I watched something flicker behind Camille's eyes, because she had not thought about Lily at all, not once, and now she would have to, and she did not like being handed a thing she did not want to carry. I stepped around her. Behind me I heard her heels stay exactly where they were. My coat was somewhere in that room, but I did not go in for it. I could not stand in a small space with that woman's perfume and my own heartbeat. I went for the front doors instead, the enormous ones that open onto the circular drive, and a doorman in white gloves opened them for me without meeting my eyes, and the cold night air hit my face, and it was the first honest thing I had felt in an hour. The drive was full of black cars. Drivers stood in loose clusters, smoking, laughing quietly, and their laughter stopped when they saw my face, which told me everything about how I looked. I did not have a car. Ethan had brought me. That detail landed on me all at once, standing on those steps in the cold with no ring and no coat and no ride, 12 miles from anywhere I could call mine. And for one terrible second the whole size of what he had done opened up under me like the river had opened for that ring. I gripped the stone railing. I breathed. I told myself I would walk to the gate and call someone from the road, that I would not stand on the van steps and cry where the drivers could see, and I started down toward the long dark line of the driveway with my arms wrapped around myself. I was almost to the first bend, past the reach of the house lights, when I heard footsteps behind me on the gravel. Heavy, even unhurried. Not a servant's quick step. Not Ethan's. Something slower and more certain, the walk of a man who has never once in his life had to run to catch anything, because everything he wanted had always waited. I stopped. I did not turn around right away. The footsteps stopped too, a few feet behind me, and the whole night seemed to go still around us, the cars, the smoke, the far music from inside, all of it holding its breath at once. You forgot something in the river, a voice said. Low, rough at the edges. Certain. Turn around. I turned around. The man from the balcony was standing in the middle of the dark driveway, and up close he was older than his son by 30 years and harder than his son by a lifetime. Silver hair, cut close. A long dark coat that had not been made in any store I would ever walk into. His face was the kind that does not waste anything, no extra movement, no easy expression, just a stillness that made the cold air around him feel like it belonged to him. And his shoes were wet. That was the detail I could not stop looking at. The hem of his trousers was dark and heavy with river water, and his expensive shoes were soaked through and ruined, and in his open hand, held out flat toward me under the far reach of the drive lights, was my ring. He had gone down to the water. This man, who 200 people were afraid of, had walked away from his own party, down the stone steps to the black edge of the Hudson, and he had put his hand into that cold current and found the small thing his son had thrown away like it was garbage. My mouth opened and nothing came out. It is yours, he said. Take it. It went in the water, I said, stupidly, because my mind was still 3 minutes behind my eyes. I saw it go in the water. And now it is out of the water. He did not smile. He simply kept his hand held out, patient, unbothered by the wet ruin of his own clothes, waiting for me the way a mountain waits. Damien Vance, he said. Ethan is my son. Which means tonight my family did something dishonorable to a guest under my roof, and I do not let debts like that stand overnight. I did not take the ring. I do not fully know why. Maybe because taking it back felt like agreeing to the story where it belonged to Ethan in the first place. Maybe because my pride was the only thing I had left standing, and I was holding onto it with both hands. I looked at the ring in his palm, and then I looked up at him, and I said, he wanted everyone to watch him throw it away. Now you want me to take it back in the dark where no one can see. I am not sure that fixes what he did. Something moved across his face then. Not anger. The opposite of anger. A kind of narrow, sudden attention, like a man who had come outside expecting to hand a crying woman her jewelry and instead found something he had not accounted for. He lowered his hand a few inches. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked, in a way that no one inside that house had looked at me all night, not as the caterer's daughter, not as the girl who had climbed too high, but as a person who had just said something true to his face on his own property, which I would learn later almost no one ever did. No, he said slowly. It does not fix it. You are right. The river wind moved between us. Somewhere back at the house the band had started again, faint and bright, playing for people who had already forgotten my name. Then I will not ask you to take it in the dark, Damien said. He closed his fingers around the ring. He slid it into the pocket of his soaked coat, and the gesture felt strangely like a promise, though I could not have said a promise of what. You do not have a car. It was not a question. I will walk, I said. You will not walk. He turned his head a fraction, and a black car at the top of the drive turned its lights on, as if it had been waiting the whole time for exactly this. My driver will take you wherever you are going. And Naomi. He knew my name. I had not told him my name. Lily asked for you. Twice. Before the nanny got her upstairs. My heart cracked straight down the middle. He watched it happen on my face, and he did not look away, and he did not use it. He just let me have the truth of it, the way you hand someone the one thing they actually came for. The child does not understand what happened tonight, he said. But she understands that the one person in that house who reads to her did not come up to say goodnight. He let that sit. Then he stepped back, and the cold reclaimed the space where he had been, and he said the thing that I would turn over in my mind for weeks, alone, in the dark, trying to understand what it meant. Go home tonight, Damien Vance said. But do not disappear. My family is not finished with you. And then, quieter, almost to himself, in a voice I was not sure I was meant to hear, and I have only just begun to look. He walked back toward the house with his ruined shoes, and I stood in the dark with the driver holding a door open for me, understanding for the first time that I had not walked out of the Vance story that night. I had walked into a different one. I did not sleep. I sat at the window of my small apartment above the flower shop on Delancey Street until the sky over the river turned the gray of dishwater, and I stared at my bare hand, and I tried to make the night make sense. By morning the story had already found me. It was on 3 society pages before I had finished my first cup of coffee, the Vance name in the headline, my face in a photograph I did not remember anyone taking, and in every version I was the same thing, the ambitious nobody who had been quietly and correctly removed. Not one of them mentioned the ring in the river. A man in a wet coat pulling a dead marriage out of the current does not fit the story people would rather tell. My phone did not stop. Reporters. A blocked number that breathed and hung up. And then at 9 in the morning, a text from a number I did not have saved, for words that turned my blood to ice water. Stay away from Lily. I knew who it was before the second message came. Camille. The family has decided it is confusing for her to keep seeing you. Her nanny has new instructions. Do not come to the school. Do not call. It will be easier for everyone, especially the child, if you simply let go now. I read it standing in the middle of my kitchen, and the floor did not feel like it was under me anymore. They could do it. That was the thing I understood in that moment, standing there in yesterday's dress. The Vances could reach into my life and take out the one person who had made the last 2 years worth living, and they could do it with a text message before lunch, and there was not a single thing I could put in their way. I was not her mother. I had no paper that said Lily was mine. I had only 2 years of ribbons and bedtime lamps and small warm hands, and none of that is worth anything in a family that owns judges. I found out how deep it went by accident. I went to the flower shop downstairs to help Rosa open, because my hands needed something to do, and Rosa would not look at me. When I finally made her, she told me, almost crying, that a man in a suit had come by at 7 that morning, very polite, and had asked whether she was aware of the kind of press her tenant was bringing to the building, and had left a card, and had suggested it would be a shame if the shop's lease became complicated. The Vance name had not been spoken. It did not need to be. That is how the powerful erase you. Not with a fist. With a card left on a counter and a polite question about your lease. By that afternoon I understood the shape of the thing that had a hold of me. I was not fighting a man who had thrown away a ring. I was standing in the path of a family that could make me vanish from my own city, my apartment, my work, and worst of all from Lily, and could do it so quietly that in a year no one would even remember I had been there. I sat on the floor of my own kitchen with my back against the cabinets. I thought about running. I thought about how easy it would be to take the last of my savings and go somewhere the Vance name did not reach, and I let myself think it all the way through, and then I thought about Lily waking up in that enormous house asking for the small lamp and asking for me. And being told, gently, again and again, that I was not coming, until one day she stopped asking. And I knew I could not run. That night my phone buzzed one more time. Not Camille. The unsaved number from the driveway, the one I had not given anyone, the one I somehow already knew belonged to him. One line. They told you to disappear. Do not. I stared at it. My thumbs hovered over the screen. Before I could answer, a second message arrived, and this one made my breath stop in my chest. Lily has not eaten since yesterday. She is asking for the woman who reads to her. Come to the East Gate at 9. Tell no one. My son will not be there. I sat in the dark and looked at those words for a long time. Everything I knew about safety told me to put the phone down and never answer, that a family that could erase me could just as easily be setting a trap, that the smart thing, the safe thing, was to stay exactly where I was. But he had not said come save yourself. He had said a child has not eaten. And whatever Damien Vance was, whatever ruthless thing that name meant to the men who went quiet when he entered a room, he had used the one key that opens every lock I have. I stood up. I found my coat, the one I had finally gone back for. I looked at my bare hand one last time in the hallway mirror, and I made a choice that I knew could cost me everything I had left. At 9 o'clock, I went to the east gate. The east gate was open when I got there. Not the grand front drive with its line of black cars, but a smaller stone entrance half hidden in the trees, and it stood open like it had been left that way for me and only me. A single guard nodded once and looked away, the way a man looks away when he has been told to see nothing. The house was different at night with the party gone. Dark, enormous, quiet as a church. A woman I did not know, an older housekeeper with kind tired eyes, met me at a side door and put a finger to her lips and led me up a back staircase I had never seen, and the whole way up my heart was beating so hard I thought she must be able to hear it. She stopped outside a door with a thin line of warm light under it, and she whispered, "She will not sleep. She will not eat. 3 times she has asked the window if you are coming." Then she stepped back and left me there, and I understood that whatever was happening in this house, this woman had decided which side she was on, and it was mine. I opened the door. Lily was sitting up in a bed far too big for her, in the dark, with a small lamp on, and when she saw me her whole face came apart. She did not shout. She was too tired to shout. She just held up both arms, the way she has since she was 4, and I crossed that room and I gathered her up, and she pressed her wet face into my neck and held onto my collar with both fists like I was the last solid thing in a flood. "They said you went away," she whispered. "Camille said you did not want to see me anymore." "Camille was wrong," I said into her hair. "I will always want to see you. Always. Do you understand me?" She nodded against my neck. I sat on the edge of that enormous bed and I rocked her, and I told her the story about the fox and the lantern that she has made me tell 100 times, and slowly her fists loosened on my collar, and slowly her breathing went long and even. And the whole time I was not thinking about the Vances, or the ring, or my lease, or the men in suits. I was thinking that this small warm weight going heavy with sleep against my chest, was the only thing I had ever been sure of. I did not know how long he had been standing in the doorway. When I looked up, Damien Vance was there in the dark hall, one shoulder against the frame, and he was watching us the way he had watched me on the terrace, without moving, without speaking, a stillness that filled the whole room. I do not know how long he had been there. Long enough to hear the fox and the lantern. Long enough to see a child who would not eat for anyone finally fall asleep. He did not come in. He did not want to wake her, and that small courtesy told me more about him than anything he had said in the driveway. I eased Lily down onto her pillow. I pulled the blanket to her chin. I turned the small lamp so it faced the wall the way she likes it, and then I stood, and I walked to the door on legs that did not feel like mine, and I stepped out into the hall and pulled the door almost closed behind me. We stood very close in the narrow dark. "You came," he said quietly. "You told me she had not eaten," I said. That was not a thing I could sit with. He looked at me for a long moment, and there was something working behind his eyes, some calculation reaching its end. "My son had everything," he said, low, so it would not carry. "Every door in the city opened before he was old enough to knock. And he stood on a terrace and threw away the one person who loved his daughter without being paid to." He shook his head, once slowly. "I have spent 30 years learning to tell what a thing is worth by watching what people do when they think no one important is looking." His eyes did not leave mine. No one important was supposed to be looking tonight. The air between us changed. I felt it change. "There is something you should know," Damien said, and his voice dropped even lower, and for the first time that unshakable stillness of his had a hairline crack running through it. "The ring my son threw in the river. It was not chosen by him. He did not buy it." He paused, and I watched him decide to hand me a thing he had never handed anyone. "That ring belonged to my late wife. To Lily's grandmother. It has been in my family for 60 years. My breath stopped. "Ethan took it without asking," he said, and he put it on the hand of a woman he was already planning to leave, and then he threw it in the river to please the family he is actually planning to marry into. His jaw tightened. "So no, this is not finished. Not by a long way." Somewhere below us, a door opened, and hard, fast footsteps started up the main stairs, and a voice I knew far too well called Lily's name into the dark. Ethan was home. Damien did not move fast. That was the thing I would remember. Ethan's footsteps were coming up the stairs two at a time, and his father simply turned toward the sound with the calm of a man who has never once been late to anything, and he said to me, very quietly, "Stay behind this door. Do not come out until I come for you." And I did, because his voice left no room for anything else, but I left the door open a crack, and through it I watched. Ethan came up onto the landing red-faced and breathing hard, and he stopped short when he saw his father standing in the dark hallway outside his daughter's room. "Dad, what are you? Why are you up here?" His eyes went past Damien to the door I was behind, and I saw the exact moment the math finished in his head. "Is she here? Did you bring her here?" "Lower your voice," Damien said. "Your daughter is asleep. For the first time in 2 days. You do not understand what she is." Ethan's voice climbed. "She is nobody, Dad. She is a caterer's kid who saw a way up and took it. The Ashfords are ready to sign. Do you know what that merger is worth? Do you know what Camille's father can do for this family? And you are up here in the dark playing house with the help." The word landed in the hallway like a slap. The help. Damien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had not risen at all, and somehow that was so much worse than shouting. "Tell me about the debt," he said. Ethan went still. "I do not know what you mean." "The $140,000, Damien said. "The one you moved through the club accounts and thought I would not see because I am an old man who does not read the ledgers anymore." He tilted his head. "The Ashfords are not a merger, Ethan. They are a bailout. You did not leave that woman for a better match. You sold yourself to cover a hole you dug, and you used my dead wife's ring to do it, because you needed Camille's family to believe you were already free." The silence after that was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Ethan's mouth opened and closed. "That is not," he started. "Do not." Damien lifted one hand, just slightly, and his son stopped talking as though a wall had come down. "I have spent 2 days learning exactly what my name has been spending itself on. I know about the debt. I know who you borrowed from before the Ashfords. I know what you promised them, and I know what you have not told Camille, and I know what you did to that woman's lease this morning, using my name, without asking me." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "You have been very busy spending a power you did not earn." I stood behind that door with my hand pressed over my mouth, and the whole shape of the last 2 days rearranged itself in front of me. The lease. The men in suits. Camille's text. None of it had been the family. It had been Ethan, borrowing his father's shadow, cleaning up his own mess, and calling it the family's will. "What are you going to do?" Ethan said, and for the first time his voice had fear in it. Damien looked at his son for a long, long moment, and something in his face closed like a door. "I am going to do what I should have done years ago," he said. "I am going to find out what things are actually worth. Including you." He turned away, which was its own kind of verdict, and he walked back toward the door I was behind, and Ethan called after him, "She will never be one of us. You know that. The city will laugh at you." Damien stopped. He did not turn around. "The city," he said, "does whatever I decide is funny." And he opened the door, and he looked at me standing there in the lamplight with my hand still over my mouth, and whatever he saw on my face made his own expression change. He stepped in and shut the door on his son. "You heard," he said. It was not a question. "All of it," I whispered. He crossed to the window and looked out at the black line of the river, and for a moment the ruthless stillness left him, and he just looked tired and old, and like a man who had built an empire and raised a son who would sell it for a woman's approval. "There is a dinner," he said finally. "Sunday. The whole family. The Ashfords. Camille. Everyone who watched him throw that ring in the water." He turned to face me. "I want you there." My heart slammed. "As what?" I managed. He looked at me, and for the first time since the driveway, the corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, but the ghost of where a smile would be. "As the one thing in that room," Damien Vance said, "that none of them can put a price on. Come Sunday. Where whatever makes you feel like you are worth what I already know you are worth. And Naomi." He picked up a plain white envelope from the table by the door, the one I had not noticed, and he held it out to me. "Do not open this until Sunday. When you do, you will understand what your ring was really protecting." I kept the envelope on my kitchen table for 4 days, and I did not open it. It sat there white and patient while I went to work, while I lay awake, while I turned Sunday over and over in my mind, and every time my hand drifted toward it I heard his voice say, "Do not open this until Sunday," and I stopped. But the truth found me before Sunday did anyway, because the truth always does. It came in pieces. Rosa from the flower shop, forgiven and forgiving, told me the man in the suit had come back, and this time he had apologized, and had torn up the card about the lease in front of her, and had said the matter was closed on instruction from above. The housekeeper with the kind tired eyes, whose name I learned was Ruth, began to text me small things, a photo of Lily eating breakfast, a note that the little lamp was on. And on Friday, An attorney I did not hire called to tell me, carefully, that a file had been opened in my name regarding guardianship visitation, funded by a party who wished to remain unnamed, and that I should not worry about the cost. I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone in my hand, and I finally understood what was being built around me, quietly, without my permission, by a man in ruined shoes. He was not saving me. He was making it so that no one could ever erase me again. On Saturday night, I could not stand it anymore, and I opened the envelope. Inside was not money. It was a single photograph and a folded letter in a woman's handwriting, old, the ink gone soft brown with time. The photograph was of a young woman at a piano, laughing, a small child on her lap, and around that young woman's neck hung the ring on a thin chain, my ring, the one from the river, unmistakable even in the old picture. On the back, in the same handwriting, it said, "For whoever loves this family when it does not deserve to be loved, she will know who she is." I did not understand at first. I read the letter 3 times before it broke over me. It was from Damien's late wife, Eleanor. She had written it years ago, before she died, and she had left instructions that the ring was to pass not to a bride chosen for money or name, but to the first person who loved a Vance child the way she had loved hers, freely, when there was nothing in it for them. Ethan had not known. Ethan had grabbed the ring from a safe thinking it was only expensive, and he had put it on my hand to look serious for the Ashfords, and then he had thrown into a river the one object in that family that had been waiting for years. For exactly a woman like me. And Damien had watched his son do it, and had gone down into the cold water, and had understood before I did what it meant that Lily would not sleep for anyone else. I sat on my floor and I cried then, finally, not the tears I had swallowed on the terrace, but different ones, because for 2 days I had believed I was a woman a family was throwing away, and the truth was the exact opposite. I was the woman that a dead grandmother, wiser than her son, had been waiting for. On Sunday I put on a deep green dress, the color of the river before it goes dark, and I did my hair the way I like it and not the way that House would prefer, and I took the photograph and the letter, and I did not take the ring, because Damien still had the ring. I did not know what he intended to do with it. I only knew that I was walking into a room full of people who had watched me be thrown away, and that this time I knew something they did not. Ruth met me at the door with tears standing in her eyes and squeezed my hand and said, "It is a good night, child. Go on in." The dining room was enormous and gold and full. The Ashfords in a row. Camille at Ethan's side in white, a woman who thought this was her engagement dinner. Ethan pale as paper. And at the head of the table, Damien Vance, in a dark suit, still as stone, watching the door. Every head turned when I came in. The room went quiet, that quiet the handbook of my whole life had taught me to fear, the quiet of a room deciding you do not belong. But I was not afraid of it anymore. I walked the length of that long table with the photograph in my hand and my chin level, and I stopped beside Damien's chair, and I set the old photograph face up on the white tablecloth in front of everyone, the young woman at the piano, the ring on its chain, and I watched the color drain from Ethan's face as he recognized his own mother. Camille leaned in, confused, smiling still. "What is that supposed to be?" And Damien Vance stood up. He stood, and the whole room stood inside his silence. Damien picked up the old photograph from the tablecloth and he held it up so the long table could see it, the young woman at the piano, the child on her lap, the ring on its chain, and he let the quiet stretch until it was unbearable. "This is my wife," he said. "Eleanor. Some of you knew her. She wore this ring for 40 years, and before she died she left it in trust, with a letter for one person. Not a bride with the right last name. Not a merger." His eyes moved, slow, to Camille and stayed there 1 second too long. "She left it for the first soul who loved a Vance child freely, when there was nothing to be gained by it." He set the photograph down. 3 months ago my son took that ring from the safe without asking me. He put it on a woman's hand to look respectable. And then, when a wealthier family offered to pay his debts, he stood on my terrace and threw 60 years of my wife's memory into the river to prove he was available. He turned his head toward Ethan, and his voice never rose, and that was the terrible power of it. "You did not throw away a woman, Ethan. You threw away the only person in this house Eleanor would have recognized." Ethan was on his feet. "Dad, in front of, you cannot. Sit down." 2 words. Ethan sat down. Camille's father was rising now, red, blustering about arrangements, about signatures, about what had been promised, and Damien let him talk himself out, and then he said, quietly, "There is no arrangement. There was never a merger. There was a young man drowning in a debt he hid from me, and your family offered to buy him, and I have paid that debt this morning myself in full, so that no one at this table owns any piece of my blood ever again." He let that land. "You came to sign a marriage. You may go home." The Ashfords went white. Camille turned to Ethan, and whatever she saw in his face ended something, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped, and she walked out of that dining room in her white dress, and no one stopped her, and no one ever mentioned her again. And then the room was quiet, and Damien turned to me. He came around the head of the table, slow, certain, and he stopped in front of me where everyone could see, and he reached into his pocket and took out the ring. My ring, Eleanor's ring, dry now and clean and catching the light. He did not kneel. A man like that does not kneel. He simply took my hand, the same hand his son had stripped bare on the terrace, and he looked at me and not at the room. I have spent 30 years learning what things are worth, he said, and I have never in my life been as certain of a thing as I am of you. Eleanor left this ring for the person who would love this family when it did not deserve it. I am not going to hand it to you in the dark this time. His thumb moved once over the white band of skin on my finger, the mark that was still, faintly, there. I am asking you in front of every person who watched you be thrown away. And then Damien Vance, the man the whole city went quiet for, slid onto my finger a ring far larger and far older and far heavier with meaning than the one his son had ever understood, and he said, loud enough for the length of that long gold table to hear every word, you will never again be the thing they can throw in a river. You are the thing this family did not deserve, and I am spending the rest of my life earning you. The room did not laugh. The room stood up. One by one, the same people who had watched me walk out in shame 3 days before, the cousins, the associates, the men who went quiet when he entered a room, they rose to their feet around that table, and it was not for him. He turned my hand palm up so they could see the ring, and I understood that he had built this whole night not to punish his son in front of them, though he had, but to make 200 witnesses out of the same crowd that had witnessed my humiliation. What had been done to me in public, he had undone in public. At the far end of the table Ethan sat alone, unpaid, unmerged, unowned, looking at his hands, and his father did not spare him a single further glance. Because in that family, the cruelest thing Damien Vance could do was decide a man was no longer worth looking at. But I looked at him. For just a moment, I looked at Ethan, and I felt no triumph, only a strange far-off sadness for a man who had been given every door and had thrown the only real thing he owned into the dark. And then a small voice from the doorway said, Naomi. And I turned, and Lily was standing there in her nightgown, having climbed out of bed and found her way down, and she saw the ring on my hand, and she smiled like the sun coming up, and she ran the whole length of that dining room, and I knelt down and caught her. We did not marry quickly, and I want to say that plainly, because the story people wanted to tell was that a powerful man snapped his fingers and a poor girl's life was fixed, and that is not what happened, and it matters to me that you know the difference. What happened was slower and truer than that. Damien did not move me into that enormous house the next morning like a prize he had won. He asked me, the following week, over coffee at a small table in the back of Rosa's flower shop, because he had learned that was where I felt most like myself, whether I would let him earn a place in my life at the speed I chose and not the speed his money could buy. And I said yes to that, to the earning, not to the rescue, because I had spent my whole life being told what I was worth by people who had never asked me, and I was not going to trade one owner for another, even a kind one. He understood. That was the thing I came to love before I loved anything else about him. He understood that a woman who has been thrown in a river does not want to be fished out and mounted on a wall. She wants to learn to swim in her own name. So we took our time. I kept my apartment above the flower shop for a full year, and I kept working, because the work was mine, and he never once suggested I stop. He came to Sunday dinners at my small table more often than I went to his long gold one. He learned how Lily likes her ribbons and which drawer they live in. He sat on the floor of a child's room and let her tell him the story of the fox and the lantern wrong, all the way through, without correcting her once, and I stood in that doorway the way he had once stood in mine. And I understood that the ruthless man the city feared had been, underneath it all, a lonely one, waiting 60 years for his own wife's letter to come true. Ethan I did not destroy, though I could have, in the end, and there were nights I wanted to. Damien gave him a choice. The kind of choice that family had never once offered anyone, which was to leave the city, get honest work, and become a real father to his daughter on weekends under my roof and my rules, or to keep the name and lose everything the name had ever meant. To my surprise, he took the harder road. He is not a good man yet, but he is a smaller and more honest one, and once a month he sits at my table stiff and quiet and watches me braid his daughter's hair, and I have decided that letting him see, over and over, the ordinary love he threw away is a truer justice than any ruin I could have wished on him. Because that is what I learned, in the end, and it is the only thing in this whole story I would carry back and hand to the woman standing on that terrace with her hand held over her shaking fist. I thought, that night, That my worth was a thing other people assigned to me, that it could be put on my finger by one man and thrown in a river by another, that I was only ever as valuable as the last powerful person willing to claim me. And I was wrong. The ring Damien gave me is beautiful, and it is old, and it means more than the one that went in the water, but it is not why I stopped being afraid. I stopped being afraid the night I climbed a back staircase to hold a crying child who was not mine by any law, for no reward, because it was simply who I was when no one important was supposed to be looking. That is the thing no family can give you and no man can take. Eleanor knew it. She wrote it in soft brown ink and left it in a safe for a stranger she trusted the future to send. She will know who she is. I know who I am now. I am the woman who did not disappear when she was told to. I am the one who went back for the child. I am worth exactly what I am worth, whether there is a ring on my hand or a white band of bare skin where one used to be, and I will spend the rest of my life teaching a little girl that the same is true of her, that no one, not a father, not a fiancé, not a whole city that goes quiet for the right last name, gets to decide the value of her heart but her. We married in the spring, by the river, the same river, which was Damien's idea, and then, once I understood it, mine. I stood at the water where my ring had gone under, and I was not the woman who had been thrown away there. Lily held the flowers. Ruth cried. And when it was done, Damien took my hand, the one that had once been stripped bare in front of 200 people, and he did not hold it up for anyone to see this time. He just held it, quietly, the way you hold something you are not showing off but keeping, and the water went by us the way water does, carrying everything downstream except the two people who had finally decided to stand still.